Okay, in this section we're also going to be making a ball toss game. We're going to start off by turning between centers, which was the very beginning lesson. We're going to find the center, turn between centers, get it round, and form our tenon so we can mount it in the chuck. All right, find our centers. And the first thing we're going to do is turn it round, get a nice round. Now I'm not going to be fussy with this. I just want to get it round roughly. So the next step is to go ahead and form our tenon. In order to do that, we're going to take a 1/4 inch parting tool. And ideally, we want that tenon to be, you don't have to do an exact measurement, about 1.5 parting tools wide is roughly about 3/8 of an inch or so. That's plenty. And we went 2 to 2 1/4, but we have a little jig, measuring jig that you can use to determine. So that's pretty good. We got the size. The next step is to go ahead and form a taper. The taper should go the largest on the outside and taper on in. You can do it with the parting tool. The problem with that is when you do that, you leave a little ridge on the bottom, which is not the best technique. It's okay, but better yet, I like to just take my spindle gouge because it's handy, and I just go ahead and cut a nice little taper right from the edge in with my spindle gouge, and that way I can get it right up to the base, and that's good to go. The other technique is to use a skew, and you want to use it like as a scraper. Bring the tool rest up a little bit, adjust my height, so just come right in. That's it. So there's 3 different ways you can form your tenon. As I said last session, a most versatile chuck is a 50 millimeter. What's important about this chuck, and most of them are, is they are formed with a slight taper on the outside and on the inside. And there's a slight ridge on the edge. And ideally, the best grip that you can have is a contracting grip that is as close to the perfect circle as possible. So let me show you a couple of examples of tenons. Ideally, this is a good example. This is about 2 1/8 inch. According to the manufacturer, you should be able to go anywhere from, I think it's 1 7/8 up to 2 1/4. Now we have charts for the different chucks and the jaws that we have. 25 millimeter, 50, 100 millimeter power jaws, and what we call the Coles jaw. Okay, this chart will give you the dimensions for expanding or contracting, and also tell you the size that the large Coles jaws will hold and the recommended speed. So don't be afraid to use them. You would find this on the internet under, the different size jaws from the manufacturers. All right, so we have this almost perfect tenon. The thing that is maybe hard to catch on the camera, but if you can notice, you can match that taper, all right? That's number one. Number two, as I mentioned before, you want this flat up against the surface. The third thing is you don't want it bottomed out. You don't want this touching the bottom. The problem with it being large, it's hard to see, is that you don't have good contact all the way around the full circle. This surface is not straight. So when I bottom it out, and I just put this in there by hand, you can see there's a gap here. And if I'm not careful with this, I can put this in here crooked. Now I'm off center, which may be important. All right, the next step is to go ahead and mount the workpiece in the chuck. And you want to put this in by hand and just barely snug it up, okay? And you don't want to tighten it up, just enough so that it stays in place. And then bring your tailstock up, and you have your center from turning it between centers. Go ahead and line that center up, and then put a little pressure up against the chuck. And the next thing you want to do is come over, take a look, and make sure that the chuck is in contact with that shoulder completely. If there's a gap, when you turn this on, it's going to wobble. All right, so that's important. Take a look. If everything lines up good, then go ahead and tighten up your chuck. Our next step is going to be drilling a known diameter. We want to drill a hole 1 7/8 inches in diameter and 1 7/8 inches deep to form the base of our cup for the ball toss. To do that, we're going to use Jacob's chucks. We have two types available. We have a keyless and a keyed. I'm going to go with the keyless first. I'm going to mount that in the tailstock, bring the quill up till it engages. Now this is 1 7/8 inches Forstner bit. Forstner bits, you want to be sure your speed is slow. I don't like ever going over 500 RPMs. I know the chart says the 1 inch and lower you can go faster, but just out of habit, I try to keep them around 500. Now, when you have a larger diameter bit, a lot of times these things overheat and they're hard to drill in. Now this is fairly small, but you get up around 2 inches or so, it's hard to drill a large diameter hole very deep. So there's a 3-step process to drill a smaller hole first and then clean it up to the big one. The problem with Forstner bits is if I take a 1-inch bit and I drill into the depth that I want, I lose my center. The way this is designed, my center disappears. Now if I want to come in with a larger bit, it's awful difficult to center the tool because I have no center. Go ahead and start your cut or your hole with the larger Forstner bit. I want this around 550. Whenever you start out, you want to hold on to your chuck until it takes a nice bite and tailstock is locked, and then go ahead and start the cut. We want to come in about a 1/2 inch or so, maybe a little bit more, and then stop. By taking that larger bit in, I've formed a shoulder here, so that when I drill in with the smaller bit and I lose the center, that becomes my centering. That helps me center the larger bit and go ahead and we want to drill this 1 7/8 inches deep. So as we did last week, we take a piece of tape and go ahead and measure in 1 7/8 inches. And go ahead and place the tape at that mark. And that's our depth. Now we can bring the 1 inch up. And you see, no burning, it's cutting nicely, a smaller diameter. All right, if you stop, or if you don't continue to feed the drill bit and it's turning in there and as the friction is causing the burn, so you want to keep that drill bit moving at all times, okay? If it still burns, and quite a bit, profusely, that means your drill is dull. But it also burned if you stand still, and don't continue feeding your bit. Now I'm at my depth. And we're going to switch back to the 1 7/8 inches, lock the tailstock, and off we go. See how much cleaner that's coming off? And all I have to do is take this down. I can feel when I'm at the depth that I drilled with the 1 inch bit. Should be right about there. We'll back it off and take a look. So I'm at 1 7/8 inches deep, and that's the end of the drilling step. Okay, the next step is using a scraper, as we did in the last session, for forming the outside of the weed pot. I want to form the inside lip of the cup, and again, we're going to be horizontal. I'm going to have that tilted up slightly so I'm contacting the burr, and I'll go ahead and form that. Now, because these go to little guys, I like to taper them in. If they're going to older kids, you can just round them off, but you taper these in, and when the balls hit this edge, they'll have more of a tendency to roll in than roll out. All right, we know our depth is 1 7/8 inches, so we want to measure down about 1 7/8 inches or so, maybe 2 inches, and put a mark. Bring our tool rest up. Now the reason we do that is because that is going to be the bottom of the cup. Well, the next step is to form the cup and then the handle. So we want to make sure that we don't go too deep here. The opposite of what we did the last section, all right? It used to be in the past, I used to make everybody use spindle gouges to cut the handle out. Takes forever. Use your roughing gouge, all right? I'm going to start the cup here, or finish the cup right about here. Now I had you guys take out the smaller roughing gouges, and this is why. Because you can get in here a little bit tighter with them. And you can be as plain or as ornate as you like. The only thing to remember is these are going to little guys with little hands. So don't make the handles for a guy with gorilla mitts. Now I've had people do this and they end up with chalices instead of ball toss games because they like the way the handles come out. And you want to bring your live center up. And what that does when you're working up here especially, that gives you a little more support so that when you're making a cut, you don't get that, you can hear the difference. Before it was a little rattle, this is nice and smooth. And you can taper this a little bit if you want, or you can leave it straight, whatever you want to do. You know, you just have to be cognizant of your depth. Don't go too deep. I'm going to take my spindle gouge and just dress this up a little bit, not much. You can be as creative as you like in here, or you can leave it as plain as you like. We don't care. You just want to smooth this out a little bit. And in here, I'm going to come in and finish my handle. Now you say, hey, you're cutting uphill. No, I'm not. I'm starting at a high point and moving lower. I'm not going all the way down in here and cutting uphill because then I just tear out my grain. So I'm just coming up here little by little, removing material. Okay, my handle's formed. All right, one of the ways you can enhance your piece is you can burn in a little bit of a design, a little bit of accent. I'm not a big fan of burning. I try not to. Where it comes in handy is if you're doing a lidded box, or especially a lidded box, and you want to hide the top from the bottom, you can do a series of beads, but then burn them in. And then when you look at it, you can't tell where the top comes off the bottom. In order to burn it, first thing you have to do is you have to form a slight groove, okay? Several ways to do that. You can take your parting tool, the diamond parting tool, and now I'm just randomly putting them in, but you could put a design in. You can figure it out exactly how wide you want them to be, but just for demonstration purposes, I'm just gonna, and what I do is I turn usually your parting tool is used like this. If you turn it sideways, tilt it up a little bit, you can use this point to cut a nice V. So I would come up a little bit high, introduce that, and I've got a nice little groove there, V, okay? The other way to do it, you could take your spindle gouge and just put a couple of small tapers in. Same thing, you got a V. And what the V is for is to hold that wire in place so it doesn't move around for you. So you can do it that way. You can take your skew, and you can do the same thing with a skew. Whichever works best. All right, now we're going to burn the enhancement in. This is stainless wire, and it works the best. Just pull down. Watch your arm on the, and pull down. And we can do one more right here. All right, we have grooves cut in there when we burn our piece. The problem with not having a groove is now it's hard to hold this in one spot until you can get it started. It wants to move and wants to do its own thing. So that groove is important. Without them, you're taking a chance of the wire moving around until you get a burn started. Little burn marks here is from the wire sliding around, not having a place to settle down. It's trying to find its own spot, so to speak. It just wants to move around. So again, that's why you want the groove. You want to have a place for the wire to set. So this is fairly smooth. What I have here is I have 120 grit. I could probably have gotten up to 180, but it's fairly smooth, so it's not going to take very much. And you don't have to go crazy on the inside. And again, use a backer. Now, when I get into the tight areas, the backer's in my way, so I can fold the paper over, get into the tight spots. And that's pretty good. I'm going to go up to, right up to 220. And go ahead and finish it off. All right, basically that's it. It's sanded up. Okay, the last step now is to go ahead and part it off. I'm going to use that 16th inch parting tool now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rub that edge up against the bottom, and I can come right around and smooth that off. And just keep coming around, and what I'm doing is I'm forming, the bottom is forming a little bit of a bead instead of being straight off. Hold on to this, steady it. Little nub on the bottom, little sandpaper on the lathe. There it is. In this session we went through, we learned how to use a chuck with a tenon, a better way to hold the piece than the last session. We also learned how to drill using Forstner bits and Jacob's chuck. And we also did some enhancement by burning a little decoration into the piece. So that's it for this session. Happy turning, and we'll see you next time.